Hi everybody, this is video 4 and we're going to be talking about going to graduate school. So the first question is, should you or can you go to graduate school, right? Does it make sense for you? And then the second set of questions is, if you do think that's the right path for you, what is the process for choosing a school, for choosing a program, for applying? I encourage you to think about this, not just for the immediate future. For some of you, the appropriate choice would be to go to graduate school immediately or very soon after you complete your Northeastern degree. Even if that's not the right path for you, bear in mind that depending on where your career path leads you, you may find that makes sense for you in the future. So I think this is sort of useful information in general for thinking about some of the things that are pretty common for developing a career over time. Okay, so as I said, the first question I think is really whether you should go to graduate school at all. And as with everything we've been discussing in this course, I think that the main way to think about that is, does a graduate degree make sense for the long-term career goal that you hold? So, in other words, is, that dream job or that dream career that you're heading toward, does it require this particular credential, right? If you want to be, whatever that field is, and you have to have a master's degree or you have to have a PhD to do it, then that's more or less decided for you. If you want to do that and you need to have that credential, then you're going to go to graduate school, right? There's lots of fields where you don't need graduate training, or where it's maybe something that could help the career, but it's not necessary. So I think that's the first thing. What I strongly would suggest you don't do, and I see students do this, is go to graduate school after you complete your bachelor's degree because you like that field and you're interested in it and you enjoyed studying about it as an undergraduate. So now you're going to keep going at it at the master's level, okay? Unless you have decided to pursue a career that graduate degree is relevant to, I don't think it's a good idea to go to graduate school just for the sake of it, right? It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, right? So bear that in mind, right? I think again, planning for the future is really necessary before you decide what you're going to do in terms of going to school after your undergraduate degree. So if you think that a graduate degree is either necessary or important, useful to what you're going to pursue as a career, then the next question becomes, well, what kind of graduate degree? Graduate degrees are not all the same, right? There are master's degrees, there are PhD degrees, there are professional degrees like an MBA or a law degree. There are also sort of smaller scale kinds of graduate training. These are increasingly common, a graduate certificate. So it's not a degree, but it would be a shorter sort of set of courses at the graduate level that would give you a credential, right? And again, you do that if it's a credential in a very specific thing that you either need or want to be able to have on your resume as you start applying for jobs, okay? When should you do this? I think there's lots of different answers to this. For some people who are really eager, know what they want to do and are really eager to get to it, it may make sense to go directly from your undergraduate to your graduate degree, right? That is, starting to apply for graduate programs in the spring semester of your senior year, right? Some people do that. I think it's also perfectly fine to have there be a pause in between an undergraduate and graduate degree of a year, however many years you think it should be. What I will say is, although I think it's fine for there to be a pause in between, and I don't think there's a limit on how long that pause needs to be, I do think it's important to think about the implications of waiting a long time, right? Both because you lose a certain amount of momentum between what you did as an undergraduate and what you're doing as a graduate, and also just because it sort of extends the timeline for getting to your career, right? So I think a year or two is fine. If it ends up being 6 or 8 years, which again, lots of people do that, nothing wrong with that, but just bear in mind that it sort of extends the entire process, right? Okay, let's say you've gotten to the point where you do think a graduate degree is right for you and your career plans. You know what kind of a degree is expected, more or less, or the range of kinds of degrees. Then you want to get much more specific, right? Even within a specific field and a specific kind of degree, they're not all the same. Graduate education is much more specific than undergraduate education, right? What you will do as a graduate student is really going to be tailored to what you're going to be doing after that, to a career path, right? So you want to make sure that that specific program at that specific university is a good fit for you, okay? How do you figure that out? Well, I've got a list of things that you might look for, right? And I'll show you an example in a second. Within your general area, is there a particular subject that you're especially interested in pursuing? And does that program that you're applying to, do they have the resources to serve you in that way? Who are the faculty there, right? Who are the professors that they have in that department, and what are they good at, or what do they focus on? If you know that you want to do a certain kind of thing in your career, you definitely want to make sure there's faculty at that university who can help you with that, right? Both in terms of classes you take, but again, in graduate school, it's quite different, a graduate degree than an undergraduate degree. One of the things that's crucial when you're doing graduate work is having professors who are going to act as mentors and who are also going to help you, connect with the field, right, and get into a career. So you definitely want to make sure that they are in the same sort of ballpark in what they work on as what you want to work on. You might look also more broadly at that university, right? Like, what kinds of resources does it have? Does it have, an amazing library system? Does it have a bunch of other related programs that you could also be a part of, or at least, make use of? So start with the program. That's the most important thing. But then I'd also take into consideration, like, what's the rest of that university as a whole offer me? Funding is crucial, right? You ideally don't want to have to pay for graduate training, right? Obviously, that is not always the case. Some programs have more funding opportunities than others, right? And I'm talking about funding like, something where it's not something you have to pay back, right? You can also, of course, take loans to go to graduate school. I'm talking about funding where they will cover the cost of your tuition. Some graduate programs will do things like have teaching positions that graduate students can fill. And by doing so, you are both learning something about teaching, if that's something you think you'll do eventually, and they will do things like decrease or waive your tuition, right? So again, not all graduate programs are created equal. Some have funding resources, some don't. So that's definitely something you want to look at, right? Like when you're thinking about who to apply to, like, can they help defray the costs, right? How much will it cost me to do this? What's the student success? Most or many graduate programs, if you just look on their website, they'll have some information about their students or their current recent grads or whatever, and kind of what they're doing. If they don't have it on their website, you can also ask them about it. You want to know if students who went to that program have successfully moved forward with that career. Location, right? Do you need or want to stay close to Chicago? If so, that will be obviously a huge factor in what you think about as you think about graduate school, right? Well, are you willing to go anywhere and you just want the best possible graduate education? Then that's a different story, right? Let me give you one example of a website. This is anthropology because I'm an anthropologist. Of course, for many of you, this is not what you'll be doing, but that's fine, right? This is just an example, and it's a local example, right? So University of Illinois at Chicago has multiple degrees in anthropology. If, for example, I decided that I wanted to pursue a master's degree in anthropology, well, we won't talk about the PhD, that's a kind of a whole other kettle of fish. I want to do a master's degree in anthropology. Like, I'm going to look at this UIC website and see, like, well, is this a place I might want to do that, right? So this is the anthropology department's page, right, within the UIC's general website. You'll see some sort of general info, but the main thing I'm interested in right now is finding out about their graduate programs, right? So they have a master's program and they have a PhD program. It's important to look for this. Not all universities, not all departments at universities will have both of these, right? In fact, it happens that in the field of anthropology, it's less common for there to be master's degrees. There are plenty of schools that only offer a PhD, right? So this one has a master's degree. Great, because that's what I'm looking for. So I can then, again, learn a little bit about it. This is a 2-year program, as it says right here. And it gives me even some of the key themes or areas that this particular master's program covers, right? One is cultural heritage, where you're going to learn about museums and maybe being a cultural resource manager, right? That's like a specific area sort of within cultural anthropology. Or here's another one, bioarchaeology, right? If you want to work, for example, on, the removal or assessment of human remains, right? Ancient human remains, which have all kinds of sort of legal ramifications and legal restrictions on how those are dealt with, then that might be something that's interesting to you. So as you can already see, the master's program is much more tailored to very specific kinds of interests. You're not going to just get a general master's degree in anthropology, right? It's not going to just be like, dabbling across the field. Undergraduate degrees are much more generalist degrees, right? If you get a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Northeastern, you're going to cover all the subfields. You're going to hopefully come out of that program with a well-rounded understanding of that field. That's the goal of a bachelor's level degree. That's not what you're going to be doing in a master's program, right? You're not going to continue doing the same thing you did as an undergraduate. Instead, based on what you've learned as an undergraduate and what you now think you want to specialize in, you're going to do something much more, again, tailored, specific. So let's say I'm looking for master's programs in the Chicago area. I look at this one, I go, oh, cool, because I really do want to work in museums. Getting that master's degree in their cultural heritage concentration seems really great to me, right? So then I can, using that checklist that I have on the slide of what kind of things to look for, right? So one of the next things I might look at is who are the faculty, right? So again, these websites are often organized in similar ways. There'll often be a category called people, right, where they talk about both faculty and students and others, but just poke around. You'll find this information. So I'm going to go to people. Okay, great. They have a list of their faculty. So they've got kind of a lot of faculty, right? Look at all these different people. These are all anthropologists who work in the UIC anthropology department. So again, if I'm interested in going there for a specific thing, I want to see who these people are. Some of them are going to have nothing to do with what I'm interested in, and I will never even have a class with them, right? You're not going to meet all of them. So I want to make sure there's some, though, that are kind of on the same wavelength as me. So you're just going to have to, read their profiles, figure it out. Here's a cultural anthropologist, and you can read about what her specialty is, where she went to school, et cetera, et cetera. You also can get contact information. And at the point where you're considering applying to a graduate program, it's perfectly reasonable and, in fact, a good idea to reach out to faculty, right? You can email the person and say, hey, I'm really interested in what you do. I'm interested in doing something similar with my career. Thinking about applying, can you give me more information? That's fine. So looking at, again, who are the faculty, right? What is going on there in terms of who I might work with and who I can potentially have as mentors as I both work through the program and moving forward. Again, remember, the relationships you make with faculty as a graduate student, hopefully should continue beyond, and they will be supporting you and writing letters of recommendation for you, etc., as you move into your career. So I'm going to go back to the graduate programs and go back to this. So again, we get an overview here, but you can also often get the degree requirements. So if you want to know, like, okay, well, that all sounds good, the themes sound good, what exactly is the sequence of courses, etc., you can often, again, find this on their website. So for the master's degree, I find out, how many hours it is and something about, how they structure it. What are the courses that I'll take, etc., right? That may not be that important to you at this phase, but it's important to at least get a sense of what this thing's going to be like, okay? So again, the point is that I encourage you, if you get to this point, right, to then go online and look for, master's degree in blank or PhD degree in blank, right? Or MBA or JD, whatever the degree is that you think you might be interested in, figure out what's out there. You're going to have to look at a lot of websites, right? to find one that feels like, okay, like of the entire universe of all the programs that do this, these three seem like they're a good fit for me, or I'm excited about what those faculty are doing, or it's really close to my house and that's going to be super convenient, whatever the factors are, okay? So you want to be very purposeful. Don't just apply to the first thing you see. Be purposeful as you narrow down your list. All right. Okay. What do you actually do as a graduate student? It really will depend a lot, depending on the field you're in and the kind of degree. But again, I want to emphasize that it's not the same as your experience as an undergraduate student. You will take classes, right? Graduate training does include taking classes. But there'll be a lot of other stuff. You may be trained in particular kinds of skills relevant to your, again, that degree and that career. Plenty of programs will have you doing some kind of research, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, you may do some amount of teaching, either because that's tied to the funding that you have to do the program, or if you're ultimately going into a field where teaching will be a component, that may also be a place where you're sort of, almost an apprentice teacher, right? Where often graduate students sort of learn how to teach along the way by doing it alongside their coursework and research. Okay, so if we get to the point where, all right, you figured it out, like I do want to do this, it does seem relevant, I have, a short list of some programs that I think feel like I'd like to apply, like I think they're kind of good for me, then there's a whole application process. If you've seen other people, in your social networks go through this, or you've looked into it, it's a bit of a process, right? There's a lot of different components to a graduate school application, and some of them require really planning in advance. So I strongly encourage you, if you're thinking about this, or at the point where you go, yeah, I want to do it, really start working on it well before the applications are due, right? In a perfect world, you'd have most of a year to do it, right? Many of us don't live in a perfect world. Maybe you only have 6 months or 3 months or whatever. So don't not apply because the timeline is short, but give yourself as much time as you possibly can, right? Try not to leave that stuff until, the month before the application is due, right? So the more time you can give yourself, the better, right? So what are some of those components of the application that do require you to plan it ahead? There are a few. Tests is the first category. Different graduate programs have different requirements or lacks of requirements for these big tests. I'm sure you guys have heard of all these tests, right? Whether you plan to take one or not. So as you're looking at those different programs, once you get down to that short list, like these are the 3 graduate programs I think I want to apply to, then you're going to look at what they require you to submit, right? Is there a test on there? Those tests could be the GRE, which is a kind of general graduate examination, right? Or for some fields, particularly for professional degrees, there are very specific exams, right? The GMAT for business, the LSAT for law, the MCAT for medicine, right? Again, I'm sure you've heard about those tests. Figure out what is the requirement for the test scores I need or don't need to submit, right? Not all graduate degrees require this, right? Figure that out because you want to have time to prepare, if you're going to prepare in some way, and you want to have time to take the exam in a timely way. Some of these exams allow you to retake it, right? So you want to have time that if you prepare, take it, you're not pleased with your score, you have time to take it again, right? So these tests, again, they are organized in somewhat different ways. A lot of them, though, are not dissimilar from other standardized tests you may have taken in the past. The GRE, for example, includes those categories like verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning that I think are on most standardized tests, right? So that's kind of a more general test. The professional school ones will be more tailored to that field, all right? The tests are given at different frequencies, but a lot of them are available many, many times throughout the year. At this point also, they all have both in-person and online options, right? So it's much more flexible than it used to be in the past, where it was more limited and you had to go in person, etc., right? But figure that out, right? The GRE is offered pretty much anytime, right? You can do it more or less on demand, as is the GMAT. The LSAT and the MCAT, they offered lots of times, but it's not just like continuous, right? You can't just do it on any single day you want. So figure that out. When are the test dates, right? What do I need to do? Do I need to prep, right? And that's, again, kind of up to you. There's all kinds of courses. There are prep books, right? You don't have to buy a course. You really don't. You can, but you can also just buy like a workbook that will help you at least get a sense of what kinds of questions are on these tests, right? So again, all of that, my point really here is all of that takes time. So you don't want to do that start doing that in November if the application's due in December. Give yourself time to do a good job and get that part done. Okay. Other components of the application that require advanced work, right? That you can't do at the last minute. Letters of recommendation. These applications are going to ask you for some number of letters of recommendation. 2 to 4 is the range I'm giving you. Often it's 2, sometimes it's 3. It's important not only that you get a letter, but that you get a strong letter from someone who really knows you and your work. So that means you want to choose the people you're going to ask to write your letters of recommendation carefully. And you want to ask them in advance to confirm that they can do it. And you want to give them as much information as you can about what you're doing, what you're planning to do as a graduate student. All right, so all of that takes time. I write letters of recommendation for students all the time, and I'm happy to do it. That's the other thing. Your faculty are happy to do it for you, so don't feel like it's a huge burden or something. It's part of our jobs to do this, so I'm happy to do it. But as I tell students, I want to be able to do it as well as I can. I want to write you a strong, complete letter. So one of the things that means is you definitely, if you give me a draft of your statement of purpose, I can write a much better letter than if you don't, right? So again, planning in advance. You need to ask me in advance for the letter, and I need your statement to be able to do it. That means you're going to have to get a draft of your statement done before, the night before the application's due. In terms of timing, it's really great to give your recommenders as much time as possible. Like, months is great. At least a couple of weeks is good. But don't be shy. I've written letters for students within 2 days because that's just what happened. So don't be shy if you get in a pinch, but much better to figure it out in advance and give your recommenders the opportunity to really write you a fantastic letter, okay? Statement of purpose. I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a second. But the statement of purpose is sort of the most important part of that graduate school application. It's where you really say, here's who I am and here's what I want to do and here's why, based on that, I'm a good fit for your program and you should admit me, right? So there's a lot to say about what you should put in a statement of purpose. It's a kind of unusual sort of writing. You have to say a lot in a very short amount of space. Typically, a statement of purpose is limited to 2 pages. That's a very common sort of, limit in terms of how many words or pages you can. They don't let you just write whatever you want. You can't write a 10-page paper. So you need to know exactly who you are and what you want to do, and you need to be able to articulate that clearly and effectively in just a couple of pages. All right. So, but definitely something, again, this is about planning in advance. Your statement of purpose will not be a great statement of purpose if you write it the week before the application's due. This is a sort of writing that really improves through multiple revisions, multiple versions. If you can, it's absolutely really important, great, useful to get a draft to your faculty advisors, mentors, your recommenders in advance so they can give you feedback and help you revise it, right? If you turn in the first version of your statement of purpose, it will be much less successful than if you turn in a version that you've revised 3 times based on feedback from faculty. So aspire to do that. Okay. So, again, this is sort of an overall list of the sort of kinds of application materials typically required to apply. It's a lot, right? So again, this is not to scare anybody. It's worth doing it if this is the right path for you, but get that stuff lined up in advance, right? There's forms and that kind of stuff, getting your transcripts in. But, there's the tests and the test scores. There's the letters of recommendation. Sometimes some kinds of programs might even ask you for a writing sample, which typically would be like a paper you wrote for a course. So, if they ask you for that, you want to take some time to figure out, like, what should I submit, right? What's my strongest example of my writing or of my work? And as I said, the statement of purpose, the most important piece. All these things need to be solid, right? Ideally, you want to put your best foot forward. The statement of purpose is really crucial. Like, if there's one thing I'd have to put at the top of the list of most important element of the application, it's that, all right? Think about everything else, but make sure you put a lot of energy into that. All right. So finally, getting to the statement of purpose, which I've been saying is important this whole video. So the statement of purpose, again, a brief piece of writing, typically 2 pages, in which you are going to talk about what you want to do specifically as a graduate student and afterwards, right? What you want to do during the course of the program, and how that fits into what your career goals are. And you're going to talk about who you are and what you've done so far as an undergraduate, and in other aspects of your life that have led you to that graduate school plan. And you're going to talk about how that combination, who you are and what you've done, and what you want to do as a graduate student and beyond, how your particular version of that is a great fit with that specific program, okay? So one of the things we can already see from what I've just described is you're not going to write, if you're going to apply, let's say you're going to apply to 3 different programs, right? You're not going to turn in the same statement of purpose for all of them, right? It's like writing a cover letter or a resume. We haven't gotten to that yet. But your resume ideally also will change a little bit depending on what you're applying for, right? It should not be a generic one-size-fits-all. That's especially the case with something like a statement of purpose. Because you want to talk about not only who you are and what you've done and what you want to do, but why that fits with that specific program and what they offer and who their faculty are, etc., right? If you're applying to a program, you want to say, I see that you have a great track record in training lawyers who want to work on immigration rights, and that's what I want to do, right? Then you're going to want to highlight those kinds of things that are about why you picked that program and not just any other program, okay? So I have a few slides on here. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. A few of them also I'm going to just leave as sort of resources. So, you can look at this PowerPoint in D2L if you're planning to apply, and especially if you're planning to write a statement of purpose for this class. You may recall that one of the assignments we have in this course is that you're going to write either statement of purpose for graduate school or a resume cover letter combo, right? And I leave it up to you. You can pick whichever one of those you want. Many of you will end up writing the resume and cover letter. Fine. If you are one of the people who wants to use this opportunity to write a statement of purpose and get feedback on it, then some of these sort of extra slides that I've included in here are going to be useful for you, but I'm not going to go through all of them in the video. All right. So what are the things you're trying to answer, right? What are the questions you're posing to yourself as you're trying to write this statement of purpose? Here's how I would sort of line that up. What are you interested in your graduate work, right? What specifically do you want to study? Is there a specific topic or question or issue that you want to address, right? What are your career goals, right? How does getting that kind of training from that program fit into your plan for what you're going to do after that, right? Why are you applying to that specific program? So the first part is really about you, right? And like, again, you in terms of the graduate work you are planning to do. So this is like future you. Then you're going to talk about, okay, why, given what I think my future me is going to do, why am I picking this program, right? How is it a good fit, right? And some of the things we've already talked about. Is it because the faculty really work on that? Is it because of their track record with students? Is it because of, they have a connection to a research center at the university that does exactly the kind of stuff you want to do? Whatever it is, right? What is it about you that makes you special or a good fit? You want to draw those connections for them, right? You've already said what you want to do, but I think literally saying things like, I think this would be a really ideal place for me because, you do this, I do this, and I think that's a great fit, right? Saying things like that. You can also use the statement of purpose to sort of talk about other things that you think may be relevant, right? Do you add diversity to the program? Are you from a part of the world that, is less represented among their students, right? Do you have a background that's less represented among their students? Are you interested in a particular area that most people don't study, right? Those kinds of things. Is there anything unique that makes you stand out and makes you a good complement to what they're doing in their program? You can also use it to explain things, right? If you have, a GPA that's not quite what you would hope it would be, and what you could say about it is, when I started my undergraduate career, I felt, a little like I didn't really know what I was doing. I stumbled a bit in my first year. However, as I chose my major and got further into those courses, my grades significantly improved, right? Like, that's just one scenario, right? If you think there's something you might want to explain and you have a good explanation for it, this could be a place to do that, right? I struggled my first 2 years. Once I found anthropology, I thrived, right? Something like that is maybe worth saying. Some don'ts. This should be a formal essay, right? It should not be informal. It's not a short story. You're not writing a piece of, fiction, right? Don't make it too creative, right? In terms of the tone. You can make it creative in terms of how you organize it and what you say, but it should be written in a formal tone, an academic tone. Don't include extraneous information, right? You want to really answer these specific things. So one of the things that means is this is not your life story, right? You do not need to, and it's frankly not a great idea to start your essay saying, since I was 3 years old, I always wanted to be a lawyer. If that's true, even if that's true, right? For most of us, we didn't figure out it when we were 3 what we wanted to do. But even if it's true, you do not need to do that. And in fact, most of what you say about your life before, say, high school and your undergraduate degree, they're not going to want to know unless it's something, again, very specific about your background, your personal history that's super relevant to what you want to do and add something to their program, all right? So it's not comprehensive. It's not everything that anyone ever wants to know about you. It's specifically you as a candidate for this program and the specific things that have set you up to do a good job at that. Okay. This is kind of the last slide I'll go over, and then I'm going to leave the rest for you to look at if you think you want to. But this is sort of a template for how to organize your statement of purpose. So if you are planning on writing a statement of purpose for this course, this would be a useful tool for you, okay? In terms of not just the content, but sort of which things come in which order, right? So roughly I've got 4 parts, right? Don't take it with a grain of salt, right? It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is what I suggest. Part 1, who are you? And more specifically, what are your interests and goals as a potential student in their program, right? Part 2, you're going to summarize what you've done as an undergraduate and any other relevant training or experience. Again, some of this could be things from earlier in your life, perspectives that are relevant to what you want to do. A lot of this will be stuff you've done as an undergraduate, right? It can be about your major. And as a sidebar here, for many degrees, not all, but for many degrees, you do not need to have majored as an undergrad in what you're going to study as a grad student, right? So, again, using my field as an example, you do not need to have a BA in anthropology to go on and do a master's or a PhD in anthropology. You could have a BA in something else. No problem. Now, that doesn't hold always. In STEM fields, for example, there's a certain amount of specific coursework that will be expected for you to have done before you get to that master's or PhD program. That doesn't mean you can't do it, right? If you get a bachelor's degree in philosophy and then you want to go get a master's degree in biology, Doesn't mean it's not possible, but you will need to figure out the ways to make that transition work, right? So, again, that's something to think about and look at. But don't limit yourself by what you majored in as an undergraduate. You can do something different, or at least somewhat different as a graduate student. So that was the sidebar. Back to part 2, summarizing again, it can be about your major. It can be about if you did any research. Did you write a thesis? Or did you just do a big project in a course? Did you take a cluster of courses all relevant to what you want to do as a grad student and that inspired you to apply? Did you do an internship? Did you do volunteer work while you were in high school? Again, that really informed your perspective and inspired you to go on to do this. Any of that kind of stuff, but relevant, not everything, relevant to the path you're on. Part 3, you're going to make the link between part 1 and part 2. You're going to say it outright. Don't let it remain implicit. Say it outright. So part 3 is you discussing the connection between those recent and current activities and personal experiences as relevant to what you want to do as a graduate student. You're going to trace out that path, right? What led you from what you've done, what you've experienced, what you've got skills in, what you think is the most important problem in the world, whatever. What led you from that to how you're envisioning your next steps in your future as they pass through or lead through that specific graduate program, okay? And then part 4, I'm saying, is where you're really going to get into more of the nitty-gritty about what you want to do as a graduate student, right? Are there, again, specific areas you want to focus on or want to spend more time on? Are there specific faculty that you're really excited to work with? Again, it depends on what kind of field it is. If it's a field, for example, that has you write a thesis, right, a master's thesis, then it's going to be more important to talk in your proposal or your statement of purpose about what you think that project would be. What's the big question that you want to answer, or at least, contribute to answering? So if it's going to be a research-based program, then you definitely want to talk about where you want to put your time and energy in terms of doing that research. If it's not, you may want to frame it somewhat differently, right? But the point is, for this last part, is to get specific. Again, this is where you're demonstrating, A, that you know what you're doing, like you have a specific plan. You're not just applying randomly, right? You have a plan. And your plan has led you to believe that this particular program makes sense for you, okay? And as I say at the end, I think also showing enthusiasm, like that you are inspired, that you are, super excited about doing this kind of work, about this specific program, whatever. I've said you want to be formal in your tone, and that's absolutely the case. And this is a kind of professional academic piece of writing. But that doesn't mean you have to be staid and emotionless, right? You can also say, I'm thrilled to apply because I'm very excited about this problem and I can't wait to work on it, blah, 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 right? Okay. All right. So again, those are sort of the main things that I think I want everybody in the course to know and to think about. Again, even if you're not planning to go to graduate school right now, these are things to consider. Many careers in the contemporary world expect, or at least are furthered by, training beyond the bachelor's, okay? Know your field, but also think about, again, those long-term goals. Even if you don't want to do a degree right now, in 10 years, is the field you want to get into going to really need you to have done that? Doesn't mean you need to start graduate school tomorrow, but it means, okay, I probably need to plan to do that within the next 5 years, right? So again, it's all about thinking ahead and fitting the pieces together. All right, if you are planning on writing a statement of purpose for this course, again, I've got a few more pieces of advice, and I've got sort of a timeline, an ideal timeline, right? As I said, many of us don't end up having a full year to work on graduate applications, and you don't need to, but it will give you a sense of how to sequence the different aspects of the application so you get them all done well in time to submit the entire package when the due date comes. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about for now. I'm interested to see how many of you in the discussion are thinking about graduate school, not thinking about graduate school. Again, there's lots of answers to that question, but I'm hopeful that this video is a bit of a resource for you as you consider those options. All right, we'll talk soon.